back to another episode of DiceDaddy. Today we're going to be talking about Sage Advice and why you should never use it unless you really like it. I don't like it. I don't use it. It's dumb, but we're going to get into it. Let's get into the video.
DiceDaddy.
Alright, you guys have finally arrived right outside the edge of the town of Brindlewood. You can see in the distance there appears to be some lights from torches. The sun's beginning to set right now as you can actually see the dust begin to pick up. All around you is water so that there's a constant sound of bubbling and streaming. What would you all like to do? Alright, we're going to take a long rest. Absolutely. Well, that's perfectly fine. Go ahead and roll survival to make camp, and then if you could, let's go ahead and just do our long rest. I don't want to bug you, but I think that as an elf, I only have to rest for 4 hours, which is good because I wanted to do some scouting, and I wanted to go ahead into the city before everybody and kind of just meet some people and kind of lay the groundwork. Yeah, even though you technically can do a long rest in 4 hours, you still have to do 4 hours of other like light activity to make sure that it equals out to 8 hours. But it says 4 hours. Yeah, I don't know the point of that rule. That's just what they said on Sage Advice. So that's what we're gonna do. I hadn't read that on Sage Advice. They know what they're doing. Yeah. All right. Well, if I can't do it, I can't do it. It's fine. So let's go ahead and after that long rest, 8 hours, by the way, you guys begin to continue further into town. You suddenly find yourself ambushed by a number of werewolves that begin to jump out of different areas. Let's roll for initiative. Alright, after a very long travel through Brindlewood, you finally find yourself entering into the Underdark, into this very large magma chamber. We're going to go ahead and do a long rest, which is what you guys wanted to do. Let's go ahead and do that. You can roll survival to make camp, get everything going. What's that? No. Even though you're an elf and it takes 4 hours, you only have to do 8. Recently, did you know that Sage Vice published an article that said that in fact, after 4 hours, I do get a long rest. Now, they didn't change it. I would have known about that. Oh. They did change it. Oh, okay, well, I guess it's going to be 4 hours. Yeah, I bet you didn't read that. Yeah, I know that would have helped in the last battle, because you guys lost 4 hours in scouting. That probably would have helped, but it's fine. Thank you, I appreciate that. For going forward, we're going to make that canon. Alright? No big deal. Alright, so, as we saw, not the coolest situation to take place. I want to say that I've been in games where situations similar to that. And just to be clear for anyone that's watching, I've gotten some comments in the past where they're just like, you sound like a horrible DM. I don't run my games like this. These are just purely examples of things that I've seen in the past. But when it comes to Sage Advice, the one thing that I want to kind of talk about is, before we can get even to the idea of what it is, we have to really figure out where Sage Advice started. Back in 2017, when Sage Advice was really getting strong and going, there was a post made by the actual people there, and I'm going to go ahead and pop that up on the screen right now. It dictated that specifically, if you'll read it, and you're free to read it yourself, just as the rules do, the column is meant to give DMs as well as players tools for tuning a game according to their taste. Now I want to be clear, when we're talking about that, it's because Sage Advice was never meant to really update rules. I know that has kind of changed throughout the years, that now people take it as canon. There's a whole PDF file that you can attach and share. But as we saw, there's examples of where even Jeremy Crawford and the other sages, I don't even like calling them that, look at Sage Advice, look at a rule, and give an answer to a question. Now we're going to talk about why that's wrong, and we're going to talk about specifically why you shouldn't really listen to it. Number one, they don't take into account your table. These are people simply reading the rules that they wrote and saying, this is what it means. They don't take into account the actual time that you put in, the players that you have, the world that you built, the idea that you're going for, the general tone of your game. And as a result, these will be very bland answers. Number 2, and this is kind of an important one, did you know that sage advice actually goes back on what they say multiple times? Don't believe me? Well, we actually have some posts that prove otherwise. Here's one that I really, really like, specifically about an elf that finishes a long rest. Specifically before, whenever an elf would do a long rest, it was dictated that the 4-hour long rest that they get doesn't actually equate to a long rest. Did you know that? It actually just meant that they get 4 hours of sleep and then they need 4 hours of light activity, combining the 4 and 4 together to make 8-hour long rest. It would still take them 8 hours to actually get a long rest. But the book said otherwise. About a year later, Jeremy Crawford came back and said, actually, no, they can actually do receive a full long rest after 4 hours. Now, you can imagine how many DMs were following this situation and immediately had to change their rule book, had to throw it out all completely. I mean, that's bogus. That's dumb. Now, whenever Jeremy Crawford specifically was asked about this, he said, oh, we didn't change it. We changed what defined a long rest, the terminology in that. And when asked specifically, hey, where did you change that? He gave a very short, curt answer that didn't really make any sense. Because when it comes down to it, they're going to make mistakes. They're not going to interpret the rules properly. And some of you are going to say, wait, stop. He used the word interpretation. I want to be very clear, and this leads me to my third point. They are interpreting what they're actually writing. You're going, no, they wrote the rules. They're telling you raw rules as written. No, they're not. They're reading a rule and they're interpreting what it was meant for, and they're telling you what they believe it was meant for without taking into your account the actual table you're playing at or anything they've said in the past. Now, what that really means is you're not getting raw, because if it was rules as written, they wouldn't need the clarification. You wouldn't have to come back and ask them what it meant. It would be very clear and written out. You can take 1 attack action per round. You can take 1 bonus action per round. You can take 1 reaction per round. Now, that's the problem that I have with Sage Advice. Whenever you look at all these 3 issues that kind of combine together, you're basically taking someone's, number 1, advice that they may change their mind on later in the future, and realistically, they're not taking into account your very own table. Now, I want to preference this. It's your table. If you like Sage Advice and you like having that, perfect. Keep doing it. But if you're like me and you go, that's not right, that's not going to work for my table, I don't like it, here's what you really want to do in those situations. And I'm guilty of making some of these same mistakes and not doing them. Number 1, make the ruling. Read the rules and make the ruling. Number 2, stick to the ruling. And by stick to it, I mean write it down. If you start making rulings on random rules that defy Sage Advice and defy any sort of written down context of the actual rules, the result of that is that you'll have to go completely on your memory. You won't know how you ruled it last time. You may rule it differently in the future. You got to write it down. And number 3, be upfront with your players about any sort of rules that you're doing specifically at your table, because they may want to build a character class that's not going to work, or it's not going to be as effective as a result of some of the house rules that you're using. Now, we're going to get into a video later today about specifically house rules, but I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you like Sage Advice, use it. Me, I don't want to use it. No, I'm not going to use it. Thanks for watching. You guys have a great night.